The desert has a way of carrying silence differently than other landscapes. In the Sonoran stretch of Arizona, the night falls slowly, with a kind of patience that feels both eternal and forgiving. By the mid-1990s, Phoenix was already a growing city, a place where neighborhoods kept spreading outward from the center, hugging the wide desert floor. Streets lined with stucco houses and palm trees gave way, in all directions, to open horizons. Beyond the neighborhoods, the desert lay wide and unbroken, a quilt of cactus and sand, dotted with mountain silhouettes that looked dark and unmoving against the sky. March of 1997 was like many other months in Phoenix. The air during the day warmed quickly, the kind of heat that rolled off pavement in waves, and the nights cooled into a gentler, more welcoming temperature. The desert at night was rarely still. Crickets carried on with their small, rhythmic sounds, and an occasional car would hum along one of the larger roads, its headlights sliding softly across the stucco walls of homes. Neighbors often lingered outside in the evenings. Some sat on porches, enjoying the milder air, while children played one last game before being called in for bed. Stargazing was a familiar pastime, for the desert sky was usually clear, and the arc of stars stretched like a velvet dome above the city. Phoenix was a place of ordinary routines, families preparing dinner, the smell of grilled food drifting through yards, televisions flickering behind curtains, and sprinklers clicking on in neat, steady rotations. From the perspective of daily life, nothing suggested that this city, on that particular month, would become the stage for one of the most widely witnessed mysteries of modern times. But mysteries rarely arrive with warning. They ease into the edges of life, quiet and unnoticed, until they expand into something unforgettable. The year 1997 itself carried a mixture of familiarity and change. The internet was just beginning to slip into everyday households, though most families still relied on the evening news or the morning paper to feel connected to the wider world. Camcorders sat ready in many living rooms, used to record birthdays, vacations, or children's school plays. The hum of late-night radio shows still drew listeners who liked to let the sound of a voice keep them company as they drifted off to sleep. In many ways, it was a slower time, though even then people felt life was moving quickly. Against that backdrop, the desert, sky steady, patient, and unchanged remained. Streetlights glowed amber, casting circular pools of light onto the pavement, while backyards slipped into shadows. From above, Phoenix stretched outward in a grid of streets and rooftops, like a luminous patchwork quilt. Families in the suburbs, tucked into their routines, might have felt a sense of comfort in the sameness of those evenings. And yet, within that calm, something was waiting. A night was approaching that would draw thousands of eyes upward, binding them together in a moment of collective wonder. It is worth pausing here to imagine how normal the air must have felt in early March. The desert coolness brushed lightly against skin, carrying faint traces of earth and dust. Dogs barked distantly, then quieted again. Televisions inside homes played sitcoms and news anchors speaking of local stories, none of them predicting what was to come. If you were to walk through a neighborhood just before dusk, you would have seen sprinklers watering lawns, teenagers playing basketball on driveway hoops, and parents calling children inside for dinner. Nothing extraordinary, only the texture of everyday suburban life. The desert, though, has always held a kind of quiet magnetism. Its stillness has long inspired people to gaze upward, to wonder about the stars. Ancient peoples built their calendars and rituals around those same skies. Astronomers, hobbyists, and curious onlookers continued that tradition with telescopes and binoculars. On certain nights, when the sky was particularly clear, one could see planets glowing steadily, unmoving compared to the twinkling scatter of stars. Satellites sometimes glided silently across the firmament, faint lights tracing slow, straight paths. For those accustomed to watching the heavens, the sky was a living canvas, and yet, on this coming evening, the canvas would show something different, something unfamiliar enough to stir questions, but calm enough in its movement to feel strangely soothing rather than threatening. It would not roar or thunder into people's awareness. It would not announce itself with urgency. Instead, it would arrive like a whisper carried across the desert air, gentle and deliberate, causing people to pause in their driveways, lean back on lawn chairs, and tilt their heads in quiet wonder. Phoenix, in that year, was a place of contrasts. The bustle of downtown offices and freeways stood alongside vast expanses of undeveloped desert, where the night sky was unpolluted and stars shone with clarity. People drove between these worlds, daily between neighborhoods built on carefully drawn grids and the open, ancient silence of the desert floor. The city had long been a meeting ground of sorts, a place where the modern and the timeless coexisted. In that balance, it seemed almost fitting that something unexplained would one night drift overhead, choosing the skies of Arizona as its stage. If you had been there, on that quiet evening in March 1997, you might have been preparing for sleep, or watching television, perhaps enjoying a late walk or a phone call with a friend. The thought of looking up at the sky might not have been on your mind. And yet, when the lights appeared, thousands would share that instinctive gesture, to look upward, to notice, and to wonder. What they saw would linger, not as a fleeting sight, but as a story that stretched far beyond one night, far beyond one city. The introduction to that story, however, remains grounded in the ordinary. The hum of an air conditioner, the clinking of dishes in a kitchen, the rustling of palm trees in a light desert breeze. That was the stage, simple and unassuming, and from within that calm, the night of the lights quietly drew near. The evening of March 13th, 1997, arrived with the same unhurried rhythm that Phoenix residents had known countless times before. The desert sun, brilliant and unrelenting through the day, softened as it slipped closer to the horizon. Golden light brushed across rooftops, turning stucco walls warm and glowing, before shadows stretched longer and longer until the first hints of night began to settle in. Mountains in the distance, the South Mountains to the south, the McDowells and superstitions farther off took on darker shades, their outlines sharp against the fading colors of the sky. The desert was entering one of its most enchanting moods, when the heat released from the earth and the air became cool enough to breathe deeply with relief. On that Thursday evening, families prepared dinner, friends met for late basketball games in neighborhood courts, and commuters drove home from offices downtown, their headlights beginning to line the freeways. The desert sky, still open and clear, seemed steady and predictable. It was the kind of evening in which children might ride bikes until the last traces of daylight gave way, or couples might step outside for a stroll, enjoying the mild weather before bedtime routines began. To many, it was unremarkable in its familiarity. Yet, along the Nevada-Arizona border, something unusual was beginning to appear. The earliest witnesses would later describe it as a glow, a formation of lights, unlike the ordinary movement of planes. At first, it was subtle, distant, and easily overlooked. But those who noticed felt compelled to watch longer, to keep their eyes on the horizon. The lights did not flicker as one might expect from distant aircraft. Instead, they shone steadily, almost calmly, against the deepening twilight. They were pale at first, faint against the fading daylight, but as the sky darkened, they grew more distinct. Travelers on highways, drivers making their way south from Nevada into Arizona, themselves glancing upward more often than usual. Some pulled off onto the shoulders of the road, drawn to the strange arrangement of lights drifting silently across the sky. The desert air was quiet. No roar of engines accompanied the glow. Instead, the lights seemed to move with purpose, a slow, deliberate progression that stirred quiet curiosity rather than alarm. For those early witnesses, it was a moment of pause, of leaning against car doors or resting on hoods, simply watching as the unfamiliar scene unfolded. Back in Phoenix, the evening deepened into true night. Porch lights clicked on across neighborhoods. Television sets glowed in living rooms, and sprinklers whispered softly in yards. Parents called children inside, tucking them into beds where ceiling fans stirred the warm air overhead. Some households prepared for an ordinary Thursday night, perhaps unaware that above them something was on its way. The vast desert sky, often overlooked amid daily routines, was about to become the focus of thousands of eyes. In rural stretches north of the city, families with wider views of the horizon were among the next to notice. On ranches and in small desert communities, the lights grew clearer as they drifted steadily southward. Some observers described them as forming a V-shape, a triangular array that seemed to hold its formation with uncanny precision. Unlike flares, which drift and waver, these lights moved together, their spacing constant, as though fixed to some unseen structure. They were silent. The desert, which often carried sound easily over long distances, offered no trace of an engine, no hum of machinery. Only the steady chirping of crickets and the rustling of night air accompanied the view. 4 families gathered. Outside, the sight invited stillness. Conversations faded into silence as heads tilted back. Children pointed, their voices quieted by the strangeness of what they were seeing. Adults exchanged looks, uncertain but not frightened, as though aware. They were witnessing something beyond the ordinary. Time seemed to stretch in those moments, measured not by clocks but by the slow, deliberate pace of the lights moving overhead. The atmosphere of the desert added to the effect. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and dust. Stars were beginning to reveal themselves, pinpricks of light against the velvety black of the sky, but the strange formation outshone them, brighter and closer, its presence undeniable. For stargazers accustomed to satellites and aircraft, this was different. The lights did not follow a straight path. They seemed to drift with intention, as if tracing a route that only they knew. From northern Arizona towns Prescott, Dewey, Chino Valleymore, witnesses joined the quiet audience. Drivers pulled over along highways. Families stepped onto porches. In some places, phones rang as neighbors called each other to look outside. The event was not announced by media or anticipated in advance. It spread person to person, voice to voice, carried by the simple urgency of human wonder. "Look up," someone might say. "Do you see it?" And those words, repeated across miles of desert, drew more and more eyes to the sky. The lights continued southward, holding their formation, moving closer toward the Phoenix Basin. To the untrained eye, it was impossible to judge their size or distance. Some believed they were small, nearby lights, perhaps flares, perhaps something mundane. Others, seeing the steady triangular pattern, felt they might be looking at something vast, far larger than any craft they had ever seen. Without reference points, in the open sky, the mind reached for possibilities, stretching between the ordinary and the extraordinary. In living rooms across the region, television sets continued to hum, sitcoms played out familiar jokes, and news anchors recited the day's stories. But outside, a quieter story was unfolding, one that would not be fully understood, if ever, for years to come. It was not dramatic in its arrival, not frightening or chaotic. Instead, it was serene, as though the desert itself had opened a secret. For a brief moment, offering it to all who cared to look upward, the lights passed slowly, steadily, like a procession across the night. Some witnesses would later recall the sense of awe, a hushed reverence that made even children whisper instead of shout. Others remembered a strange calm, as though the event carried no threat, only mystery. The desert air, vast and unbroken, seemed to cradle the moment, holding it in stillness. For Phoenix, the lights were approaching. Soon, thousands of people, families in backyards, drivers on freeways, couples on evening walks, would look up. Together, unknowingly united in an experience that would bind them in memory for decades. But for now, on the northern edge of Arizona, the night of the lights had quietly, unmistakably begun. In the wide spaces north of Phoenix, the desert night deepened into its quiet rhythm. Towns like Prescott and Dewey sat nestled against low hills, their neighborhoods spread out and open to the sky. Here, away from the constant glow of city lights, the stars always seemed closer, sharper, more numerous. Residents had long been accustomed to glancing upward in the evenings, not out of habit alone, but because the sky itself offered such a reliable form of companionship. In those places, the first voices of wonder rose. A family in Prescott had gathered outside after dinner, letting the cool night air drift through as children played in the yard. Their mother, stepping off the porch, caught sight of a faint glow on the horizon, at first no more than a cluster of lights that didn't quite belong. She called softly to her husband, not alarmed but curious. Together they stood, hands shielding their eyes, watching as the points of light grew clearer. The children, sensing the shift in attention, turned to their game forgotten. What they saw seemed to move as one, lights arranged in a distinct formation, slow and deliberate against the backdrop of stars. Farther along the highway, a truck driver heading south slowed his rig to a crawl. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. He had seen planes of every type: commercial jets banking toward Phoenix, military aircraft cutting fast lines across the desert sky, but this was different. He described later how the lights seemed steady, their formation too precise, too smooth to be chance. He pulled off onto the gravel shoulder, turned down the radio, and sat in the cab with only the hum of the engine beneath him. The desert outside was silent, vast, and unbroken. He found himself leaning forward, eyes wide, not with fear, but with an odd kind of reverence, as though he were in the presence of something he could not quite name. In small desert communities, phones began to ring. Go outside, neighbors urged each other. Look at the sky. The conversations were brief, their urgency quiet but insistent. One by one, households stepped into their yards or leaned over fences, eyes following the same slow procession. Overhead, some brought out binoculars, expecting to see details that would explain the phenomenon. Yet, even magnified, the lights held their mystery, glowing steadily in their triangular pattern. Stargazers, accustomed to the predictable paths of satellites, felt the difference immediately. A retired teacher in Chino Valley, who spent many evenings charting the constellations, set aside his telescope and simply watched with the naked eye. He noted the silence, no sound of engines, no trail of exhaust. He noted the steadiness, and like meteors or aircraft, the lights held their shape as if bound together by some invisible thread. He called his wife out to join him, and together they stood quietly, shoulder to shoulder, the desert air cool on their skin, the smell of dry earth rising as the night settled deeper. The voices across the desert were not loud, they were murmurs. Exclamations spoken softly, the way people talk in libraries or places of worship. Parents told their children to watch carefully. Friends exchanged quiet comments, each one confirming to the other that yes, they were truly seeing this. The desert itself seemed to amplify the stillness, holding the moment in a hushed embrace. Even dogs, often quick to bark at unusual sights or sounds, fell quiet in some neighborhoods, as though the air carried something beyond ordinary perception. Along back roads, couples who had gone out for evening drives found themselves pulling over to the side, stepping out into the night. Gravel crunched under their shoes as they looked upward, hands shading their eyes from their own headlights. They saw the same slow drift of lights, unhurried and serene. Some leaned against car doors, arms folded, while others clasped hands without speaking. The sight did not require commentary. It seemed enough simply to stand there, breathing in the cool desert air, letting the vision unfold above. In some homes, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions. "What is it?" they whispered. Parents hesitated, unwilling to offer quick answers. For some, the moment stirred old stories of the desert, of unexplained lights told in hushed tones over campfires or remembered from newspaper clippings. For others, it was simply an unexplainable beauty, a sight to be taken in and stored as memory. Few felt fear. Instead, what settled over these witnesses was a kind of wonder, the rare sensation of being present at the edge of mystery. A farmer outside Dewey, accustomed to the regular patterns of the land and sky, leaned against a fence post and watched in silence. His fields stretched out before him, pale under the moonlight, but his eyes were fixed upward. Later, he would describe how time seemed to slow, how the ordinary markers of night, the buzzing of insects, the distant hum of a generator, faded into the background. The lights moved steadily, not darting, not wavering, but progressing with a calm that felt almost deliberate. He stayed until they drifted past, unwilling to step away until the last glow had disappeared beyond the horizon. Each witness carried their own perspective, their own quiet astonishment, yet all were bound by the same simple gesture, looking upward. The desert night, vast and eternal, had drawn their eyes in unison, connecting them across miles of open land. A family on a porch in Prescott, a trucker on a highway shoulder, a stargazer with his telescope set aside. They did not know each other, but in that moment they shared the same experience, as though the desert itself had spoken to them all at once. What made the moment powerful was not only the sight of the lights, but the atmosphere in which they appeared. There was no rush, no urgency. The lights did not streak or flare. They did not startle with suddenness. They arrived with patience, allowing time for eyes to adjust, for wonder to settle in. In that way, they invited people not to react, but to simply witness. And so the voices across the desert remained soft, carried more by awe than by alarm. As the formation continued its path southward, the desert communities slowly quieted again. Families went back inside. Truckers resumed their drives, made notes in journals. But the memory lingered, like a question written into the sky. What had they seen? The desert, vast and unyielding, offered no answers. Only silence remained, carrying the mystery onward, closer now to the heart of Phoenix. By the time the formation of lights drifted southward into the Phoenix Basin, the city had fully given itself to night. Streetlights glowed amber across intersections, freeways pulsed with headlights, and neighborhoods settled into their evening rhythms. From above, Phoenix was a wide tapestry of illumination stretching outward in all directions, a modern grid, nestled against the ancient desert floor. Yet, even against the city's glow, the approaching lights held their clarity, steady and unmistakable. In the northern suburbs, families gathered outside to enjoy the mild March evening. Some lingered on porches after dinner, the air soft and cool against their skin. Others walked dogs along sidewalks, exchanging small talk under the hum of street lamps. In these ordinary moments, the first witnesses in the Phoenix area began to notice something unusual rising over the horizon. A child tugged on his father's sleeve, pointing upward. The father, expecting, perhaps, an airplane or satellite, tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. What he saw made him pause. There, against the star-filled sky, glowed a distinct pattern of lights, bright, steady, and moving together. Soon more eyes lifted. Neighbors called softly to one another, their voices carrying across fences. A woman watering plants set down her hose, droplets pattering onto the pavement as she craned her neck to watch. A group of teenagers, tossing a basketball, froze mid-play, the ball bouncing slowly across the driveway as their attention shifted skyward. The lights continued, steady as a procession, moving silently above the city. What struck many was the sheer stillness of the moment. Phoenix, a city alive with the sounds of traffic and distant movement, seemed to hush in pockets wherever the lights were seen. Conversations thinned into whispers. The steady drone of everyday noise faded against the quiet awe of collective observation. For once, the attention of thousands aligned, not on television screens or radios, but on the wide expanse of the desert sky. Families gathered together, some sitting on lawns, others leaning against cars parked in driveways. Children pointed and asked questions that parents struggled to answer. The lights appeared in formation, often described as a vast V shape, its points glowing steadily as though fixed in place. Some wondered if they were attached to a solid structure, a massive shape that blocked out the stars between the lights. Others saw only the points themselves, too distant to define anything more. The ambiguity of the vision left room for imagination, for curiosity, and anchored by easy explanations. In apartment complexes across the city, people stepped onto balconies, shading their eyes against the city glow to watch the formation pass. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, united not by introduction but by the shared astonishment of what they were witnessing. A young couple, walking hand in hand down a quiet street, stopped mid-step and gazed upward, their conversation forgotten. A man stepping out to retrieve his newspaper paused, paper folded against his side, as he tilted his head back and simply stared. The procession moved slowly, unhurried, as though time itself had stretched. Unlike aircraft that crossed quickly overhead, the lights lingered, giving ample opportunity for thousands to take notice. Drivers on freeways slowed, some pulling onto shoulders, hazard lights blinking as they joined the silent audience. From vantage points along the South Mountain Range, the view spread wide, offering a panorama of the strange formation moving across the basin. The desert air carried no sound of engines, no vibration of machinery, only the faint rustle of breeze and the quiet murmurs of onlookers. Some households turned off their televisions, called out to family members, and gathered in backyards. Parents lifted small children into their arms, pointing skyward, their voices gentle. In living rooms where laughter from sitcoms still echoed, the glow from outside drew people toward windows. Curtains were pulled back, sliding doors opened, and soon entire households stood together on patios, staring upward in silence. The event was not announced, not orchestrated, yet it unfolded in perfect synchrony, as if the city itself had been invited to look up at the same moment. Neighbors, who might have otherwise passed one another with polite nods, now exchanged words of wonder. "Do you see it?" one asked, voice low, almost reverent. "What is it?" another replied. Their tones carried no panic, only amazement, as though they were sharing not just a sight, but a memory being etched in real time. Children's laughter quieted into whispers. Even dogs, usually alert to unusual sounds, barked less and tilted their heads upward, following the gaze of their owners. For many, the most striking element was the silence of the lights. Phoenix was used to the roar of planes, the hum of helicopters, the occasional rumble of military aircraft from nearby bases. Yet this formation glided without sound, a presence without noise. The absence of sound created a contrast that deepened the mystery. It was as though the sky had offered a vision without disturbance, a show without spectacle, leaving only the raw, steady glow of the lights against the desert night. At parks and open fields, groups of friends lay back on blankets, pointing upward, their voices soft and incredulous. One group of college students, gathered for a late picnic, paused mid-conversation, falling into silence as the formation appeared overhead. They described later how the air felt charged, not with fear, but with a deep awareness of being part of something extraordinary. They did not rush to capture it, though some with camcorders tried. Instead, most simply watched, letting the image impress itself on memory. The city looked upward together. Thousands of individuals, bound by the same gesture of tilted heads and widened eyes. From the edges of neighborhoods to the heart of downtown, people paused in their tracks. A man locking up his bicycle outside a convenience store stopped, keys dangling in his hand, gaze fixed on the sky. A group leaving a restaurant clustered in the parking lot, their chatter replaced by stillness. A child on a swing, pushed by her father, leaned back as far as she could, eyes locked on the glowing formation. All across Phoenix, ordinary life paused, and for a brief stretch of time, the city's energy converged on the same silent mystery. The lights drifted slowly, making their way across the basin, lingering long enough that countless households had the chance to witness them. Some stood transfixed until the glow finally faded into the southern horizon, the stars reclaiming their dominance over the sky. Others lingered afterward, reluctant to go back inside, as if hoping for another glimpse. In conversations that followed, neighbors spoke softly, not with conclusions, but with questions. "Did you see that?" became a refrain, whispered across fences, repeated over phone calls, murmured in kitchens as families prepared for bed. For the city of Phoenix, that night would not be easily forgotten. The image of the lights, steady, silent, and vast, had been imprinted on the collective memory of thousands. And though explanations would be sought in the days to come, for those who stood outside that evening, the experience itself was what remained. It was not the certainty of answers, but the depth of wonder that would linger, carried in the quiet voices of a city that for one night all looked up together. In the suburban neighborhoods of Phoenix, the night unfolded in countless small stories, each carrying its own sense of wonder. The wide avenues of the city's outer developments, lined with palm trees and desert landscaping, were alive with their usual evening routines. Sprinklers hissed softly, watering lawns in rhythmic arcs. Porch lights glowed warmly against stucco walls. The faint scent of grilled food and cooling asphalt hung in the air. Into these ordinary moments, the sight of the lights above wove itself quietly, transforming the mundane into the unforgettable. On one quiet cul-de-sac, a family had gathered on their front lawn after dinner. The parents sat in lawn chairs, enjoying the cool evening while their children chased each other in circles. It was the youngest who noticed first. She stopped mid-run, her head tilted back, finger pointing skyward. The parents followed her gaze, and soon the family stood together, watching as the steady lights glided silently overhead. The mother, instinctively protective, drew her children close, though her voice carried no fearingly astonishment. The father squinted, trying to make sense of the formation, his words trailing off as he realized there was nothing familiar to compare it to. The family stood there for long minutes, arms around one another, a simple suburban night transformed into something extraordinary. Elsewhere, a couple walked their dog along a quiet sidewalk. The animal tugged at the leash, nose to the ground, while the couple chatted idly about the day. When the woman caught sight of the lights, she fell silent, tugging gently at her partner's arm. Together, they looked upward, their conversation forgotten. The dog, sensing their stillness, paused as well, ears perked. The couple did not speak for a long while, letting the vision settle in. Eventually, the man whispered, almost to himself, "It's beautiful." His partner nodded, her hand tightening around his. The walk, once ordinary, became a shared memory they would carry far beyond that night. In another neighborhood, a boy, prepared for bed, curious, he slipped out of bed and pulled the curtains wider. The sight made him gasp. He called softly for his mother, who entered the room expecting to urge him back to sleep. Instead, she followed his pointing finger and froze. Together they leaned against the windowsill, their faces side by side, watching in silence. For the boy, it was a moment of pure wonder, a story he would tell for years to come. For the mother, it was a mix of awe and a faint, unspoken question of what, exactly, they were witnessing together. Neighbors, too, found themselves drawn into unexpected conversations. A man taking out the trash stopped when he saw his neighbor already standing in the driveway, eyes skyward. Without a word, he followed the gaze, and soon the two were speaking quietly, speculating in hushed tones. One mentioned airplanes, the other dismissed it. They fell into silence again, content simply to watch. In that brief exchange, strangers, who had only shared polite nods before, were suddenly connected by wonder. Their ordinary distance bridged by the shared strangeness of the night. Children in backyards turned their games into new adventures inspired by the lights. Some pointed and shouted guesses, "It's a spaceship," their voices carrying excitement rather than fear. Parents watched them with a mix of indulgence and seriousness, knowing that though the children treated it like play, something unexplainable was indeed unfolding overhead. For some parents, there was a quiet unease in not having answers, in not being able to explain the sight to their children. Yet that unease never grew into panic. It remained gentle, a soft hum beneath the surface of wonder, the way one feels when standing at the edge of an ocean at night, aware of its vastness and mystery. In one home, grandparents visiting from out of town joined their family on the porch. They, too, lifted their eyes skyward, recalling stories they had heard from decades past, those strange lights, other nights of mystery. They spoke softly to their grandchildren about how the world was full of wonders not yet understood, framing the moment as part of a long history of human curiosity. The children listened intently, the glow in the sky mirrored by the glow of fascination in their eyes. The night became not only a shared sight, but a passing down of stories, binding generations together. Some households turned on camcorders, capturing shaky footage that would later circulate far beyond their own living rooms. Fathers steadied the cameras, narrating in calm voices as mothers and children stood close by. The recordings often captured not only the lights, but the murmurs of awe, the small exclamations of surprise, and the hushed tones of family members trying to put words to the indescribable. These domestic soundscapes, simple and intimate, would later carry the atmosphere of the night to countless others who had not been there, even in places where the view was partially obscured by trees. By rooftops, people felt the presence of something unusual. They leaned out of windows, climbed onto porches, or stepped into the street to catch a better glimpse. The act of looking upward became a small ritual, repeated across the city, drawing people out of their routines and into a shared experience. Each individual perspective was different, but all carried the same undercurrent of awe. In some neighborhoods, children grew restless after the lights faded, asking questions that parents struggled to answer. Where did it go? They asked. Will it come back? Parents tucked them into bed with soothing words, though they themselves lay awake later, turning the questions over in their own minds. The night had introduced a mystery into their otherwise predictable routines, a reminder that not everything could be explained within the boundaries of everyday life. Couples, parents, children, and neighbors each lived their own small story. That night, yet taken together, these stories painted a picture of a city quietly transformed. Phoenix did not erupt in chaos or fear. Instead, it settled into a kind of hushed awareness, each household touched in its own way. The emotional tone was layered wonder on the surface, unease just beneath, curiosity flowing steadily through it all. People returned indoors eventually, but many glanced out windows one last time before drawing curtains, reluctant to let the mystery slip away too quickly in the quiet of bedrooms. As children drifted to sleep and parents lay awake, the memory of the lights lingered. It was not a memory of panic or noise, but of stillness, of standing together under a sky that had briefly revealed something unexplainable. For some, it became a private moment of connection with family. For others, a shared glance with a neighbor. For still others, a story told to children as they tucked them in. The neighborhoods of Phoenix, usually defined by their routines, had, for one night, been united by wonder, their lives touched gently by the silent procession that had passed overhead in the hours after the lights passed over Phoenix. The city settled back into its nightly rhythms. Families drifted indoors, children eventually fell asleep, and televisions hummed softly in living rooms. Yet even as quiet returned to neighborhoods, conversations continued to circle back to the strange procession in the sky. What had started as an intimate personal experience in homes and backyards began to ripple outward, weaving itself into the wider fabric of public awareness. For many, the first step was the telephone. Neighbors called one another to ask if they had seen it too, voices tinged with relief at discovering they were not alone in their experience. Friends dialed relatives across town, describing the formation with hesitant words, trying to capture the steady brilliance of the lights. Some families called local police stations, not in panic, but in search of reassurance. Dispatchers fielded these calls with patient calm, noting the reports and assuring residents that they were not the only ones witnessing something unusual. The sheer volume of quiet inquiries began to sketch the outline of a larger event. Local radio stations became the next stage of connection. Call-in programs, usually filled with late-night chatter about traffic or music requests, suddenly shifted as listeners phoned to describe what they had seen. The hosts, caught off guard but intrigued, gave space for these voices, allowing stories to unfold live on the air. A truck driver described pulling over on a desert highway to watch the lights drift silently above. A woman recounted standing with her children in the backyard, unable to look away. The radio waves carried these voices into kitchens, cars, and bedrooms across the city, and with each new story, the sense of a shared experience grew stronger. Those who had doubted their own eyes found reassurance in hearing others describe the same strange vision. Television, too, played a role in the growing awareness. Local stations received calls and faxes from viewers eager to report the phenomenon. Some residents even drove to news offices, bringing with them camcorder tapes or photographs. Newsrooms, accustomed to covering city council meetings and weather reports, now found themselves gathering footage of glowing orbs and interviewing eyewitnesses who spoke in soft but insistent tones. The first broadcasts were cautious, framing the story as an unusual sight in the skies, without drawing dramatic conclusions. Yet even in this careful approach, the coverage carried a quiet weight. The images themselves, rows of hovering lights, against the dark backdrop of the desert sky, were striking enough to invite attention. By the following morning, newspapers had begun to take notice. Articles appeared in local editions, recounting the timeline of the sightings, quoting residents, and mentioning the volume of calls to police and television stations. The language was measured, but the presence of the story in print gave it a new sense of permanence. Readers lingered over their morning coffee, reading accounts from witnesses whose descriptions echoed their own experiences from the night before. The event was no longer confined to memory. It was becoming part of the public record. As the story spread, late-night talk shows and national radio programs picked it up as well. Hosts known for exploring the edges of mystery invited callers from Arizona to share their experiences. The Phoenix Lights joined the stream of conversations that often touched on UFO sightings, unexplained phenomena, and the enduring human fascination with the skies. Listeners across the country heard these calm yet compelling testimonies, and what had begun as a regional event quietly stepped into the national imagination. The public's reaction was not uniform, yet it carried a common thread of curiosity. Some embraced the wonder of the moment, speaking openly about the possibility of otherworldly visitors. Others, more cautious, framed it as an unexplained but earthly event, perhaps new aircraft, perhaps military exercises. Still others treated it lightly, joking with friends about visitors from Mars, while privately acknowledging that the sight had been unlike anything they had seen before. Across this spectrum of responses, the tone remained largely gentle. Unlike scenes of panic portrayed in fiction, Phoenix met its mystery with calm reflection, its people turning to conversation rather than alarm. Community spaces became hubs of discussion. At diners and coffee shops the next morning, customers leaned across tables, sharing what they had seen. At workplaces, casual chatter shifted to recollections of the lights, with colleagues comparing impressions and debating possible explanations. Teachers overheard students trading stories, their young voices filled with excitement. In living rooms, families replayed camcorder footage, pointing out details and debating whether the lights were individual objects or part of something larger. Each retelling reinforced the memory, turning private experiences into communal ones. Some residents began to collect stories more deliberately. Amateur astronomers, already accustomed to watching the skies, reached out to one another to compare notes. Local UFO enthusiasts began documenting calls and interviews, sensing the importance of preserving testimony before time blurred the details. Even those who had not seen the lights themselves found themselves drawn into the conversation, fascinated by the sheer number of consistent reports. The city had become a tapestry of voices, each thread contributing to a larger picture of mystery. The tone of the media coverage remained measured, but it could not erase the quiet impact of the images. Footage aired on television showed glowing lights suspended against the night, steady and calm, without any of the sudden movements often imagined in depictions of UFOs. This steadiness lent the phenomenon a strange credibility. Viewers watching the broadcasts recognized the same formation they had glimpsed the night before, reinforcing the sense that what they had seen was real, shared, and significant. As the days passed, the Phoenix Lights became a topic of conversation beyond Arizona's borders. National newspapers picked up the story, framing it as one of the most widely reported UFO sightings in recent history. Yet, even in this wider coverage, the voices of Phoenix residents remained central. Their calm recollections, their steady descriptions, painted a picture of a community united not by fear but by shared wonder. The public reaction had grown from scattered phone calls and radio shows into a cultural moment that touched people far beyond the desert city. For many in Phoenix, the experience left a lingering effect. Even those who returned quickly to their routines found themselves glancing upward more often in the nights that followed, scanning the sky with quiet curiosity. The memory of the lights became a touchstone, a story told at family gatherings, a subject raised among friends. It carried no definitive answers, but it carried with it a sense of connection to neighbors, to the city, and to the mystery of the sky above. In the days following the strange night in March 1997, as stories spread from living rooms to radio stations and into newspapers across the country, attention gradually turned toward those in positions of authority. People had spoken to one another, shared tapes and photographs, and compared memories, but now they wanted to know what officials would say. In the stillness that followed the event, an air of expectation lingered. Surely someone, somewhere, would offer a clear explanation. The first voices to speak publicly were often those closest to the skies themselves: pilots, air traffic controllers, and military representatives. Local air traffic controllers stated that on their radar screens, nothing unusual had appeared that night. Their instruments, designed to track commercial and private aircraft, showed only the usual movements in and out of Phoenix Sky Harbor. Yet, when pressed by reporters, some controllers admitted that the sheer number of eyewitnesses could not easily be dismissed. Their professional silence carried a weight of ambiguity, leaving the public to wonder whether the instruments had failed to capture the event or whether the lights belonged to something radar simply could not register. The U.S. military soon became central to the conversation. Arizona is home to several important bases, including Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. The wide desert skies are frequently used for training exercises, and many residents are accustomed to seeing aircraft maneuvers and hearing the distant rumble of engines. With this in mind, some wondered if the lights might have been the result of routine or experimental activity. Officials at Luke Air Force Base initially denied any unusual operations that evening. Their statements were brief, leaving room for speculation. Silence, in this case, did not settle the matter. It only deepened curiosity. As media coverage expanded, attention turned to Arizona's state leadership. Governor Fife Symington, a former Air Force pilot himself, was asked about the lights during press interactions. At first, His comments suggested he was as puzzled as his constituents. He acknowledged the volume of reports and the sincerity of those who had witnessed the event. Yet, a few days later, in a move that would be remembered for years, he held a press conference that took a different tone, announcing that the mystery had been solved. He presented a staffer dressed in a comical alien costume, framed as a light-hearted attempt to diffuse tension. The gathered reporters laughed, but many citizens did not. For those who had stood in their backyards, gazing upward at the silent procession of lights, the governor's performance felt dismissive. It was as though a profound and mysterious experience had been reduced to a punchline. The response left a lasting mark on the way the government's role in the event would be remembered in time. The military returned with a more detailed explanation. Officials stated that what many residents had seen that evening were illumination flares, released during a training exercise at the Berry Goldwater Range, a sprawling stretch of desert used for military practice southwest of Phoenix. The flares, they explained, had been dropped by a 10 aircraft as part of a nighttime operation. Suspended by parachutes, the flares would have appeared as glowing orbs hanging in formation, slowly descending and eventually fading from view. To the military, this was a straightforward answer. To many citizens, however, it raised more questions than it resolved. Skeptics of the flare explanation pointed out several inconsistencies. For one, the lights had been reported as moving steadily across the state, from the northern border of Arizona through Phoenix and beyond, long before any flares were said to have been released. Witnesses described massive V-shaped formations gliding silently, sometimes passing directly overhead, their scale dwarfing familiar aircraft. Flares, by contrast, do not travel vast distances in perfect alignment. They drift and flicker as they fall. Moreover, many residents with experience of military exercises insisted that the lights they saw were unlike any flares they had ever encountered. The steady, unblinking quality of the lights, combined with their apparent structure, seemed inconsistent with the flare hypothesis. The debate between official statements and public perception revealed something deeper about the nature of the event. It was not simply a question of what had been seen in the skies. It became, just as importantly, a matter of trust. Many citizens felt that their experiences were being explained away too quickly, that the sincerity of thousands of witnesses was being overlooked in favor of a neat and tidy answer. For some, this fueled frustration. For others, it simply underscored the mystery. If the flares were indeed responsible, why had so many independent observers described something so different? If the lights were unrelated to military activity, why was the government so eager to provide an explanation that did not seem to fit? In the weeks that followed, the conversation unfolded in two parallel streams. On one side stood the official record, the Air Force's flare explanation, the governor's playful dismissal, the steady refrain that nothing unusual had occurred. On the other stood the voices of ordinary citizens, whose calm but insistent testimonies told a different story. They described silent, massive shapes, patterns that seemed deliberate, and an experience that stirred something more profound than the glow of falling flares. Between these two narratives lay the enduring tension that would keep the Phoenix lights alive in public memory. Years later, Governor Symington himself would revisit his role in the story. In interviews after leaving office, He admitted that he, too, had witnessed the lights that night, and that they were unlike anything he could identify. He acknowledged that his press conference had been an attempt to calm the public, but he also confessed that the event remained, in his view, mysterious. This reversal added yet another layer to the story, suggesting that even those in positions of authority had been grappling with their own unanswered questions. The government response, then, was not a single voice, but a collection of them. The quiet ambiguity of air traffic controllers, the firm statements of the military, the light-hearted dismissal of a governor, and the later admission of uncertainty. Together, they formed a patchwork of explanations and evasions that never fully settled the matter. Instead, they left the phenomenon suspended in a space between official narrative and personal experience. For the people of Phoenix, this was perhaps fitting. The lights themselves had appeared silently, without explanation, moving steadily across the night sky before fading into memory. The official responses mirrored that silence in their own way, providing words that did not quite match the experience, leaving room for wonder, doubt, and reflection. The event was not closed, not neatly defined, but left open to interpretation, much like the desert sky itself, vast, quiet, and filled with mysteries that resist easy answers. Among the thousands who gazed upward on that March night, some voices stand out, not only for what they saw, but for the care with which they later recounted their experiences. These stories, offered with patience and detail, deepen the picture of the Phoenix Lights. They bring us closer to the event, not through sweeping statements, but through the calm rhythm of individual lives momentarily touched by mystery. One of the earliest stories came from a retired pilot who lived with his wife on the northern edge of the city. He had spent decades in the air, first as a military aviator and later flying commercial routes across the western United States. His evenings were quiet now, his eyes more often fixed on the stars than on cockpit instruments. On that night, he had been sitting on his back porch, enjoying the coolness that follows the desert sunset. When the lights appeared on the horizon, he instinctively compared them to every formation he had flown with or observed. Yet, as they drew closer, his trained eye told him something was different. The lights held steady in a precise V-shape, their alignment sharper than drifting aircraft could manage, their motion smoother than any descent he had ever tracked. He called for his wife, and together they watched in silence. Later, when asked about it, he spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He could not say what it was, but he was certain of what it was not. To him, it was neither conventional aircraft nor flares, but something that carried its own quiet presence, distinct from anything he had known in a lifetime of flight. Another account came from a police officer on patrol in a suburban neighborhood. He had been driving slowly along quiet streets, the kind where porch lights glow and the sound of televisions hum through open windows. His radio was calm, no unusual calls, breaking the routine. When he saw people gathered in driveways, pointing skyward, he pulled over to see what had caught their attention. Stepping out of his vehicle, he saw it himself, the wide formation gliding overhead without sound. In his training, he had learned to look for order in the unusual, to assess situations with calm detachment. Yet, in that moment, he simply stood, with the residents, head tilted back, sharing their quiet astonishment. Later, in his official report, he described the lights in the same measured tone he used for traffic incidents. but privately he admitted that the sight had stirred something deeper. It was not fear, but a kind of awe, the recognition of a mystery that lay outside the boundaries of his professional world. Families, too, carried vivid memories. One mother, living in a modest home on the city's west side, recalled how her children had been restless that evening, reluctant to go to bed. She had finally coaxed them into their pajamas when her youngest called out from the window. At first, she thought it was a stall tactic, another excuse to delay bedtime. But when she joined her child at the glass, she saw the glow above and felt her breath catch. She called for her husband, and soon the entire family was gathered at the window. The children's chatter filled the room, guesses, exclamations, little bursts of excitement, while the parents stood quietly, exchanging glances that spoke of wonder and unease in equal measure. For years afterward, the family would read the story at gatherings, the children's version filled with wide-eyed excitement, the parents' version gentler, reflective, touched by the memory of that moment of shared stillness. There were also stories from those traveling that evening, their journeys interrupted by the lights. A man driving home along the highway pulled onto the shoulder, joined by other cars whose drivers had done the same. The usual impatience of traffic melted away as strangers stood together at the roadside, united by the sight above. He later described how the desert felt unusually quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of cooling engines as people stared skyward. In that gathering of strangers, there was no rush to leave, no honking horns, only a shared willingness to pause and witness something extraordinary. When the lights moved beyond view, the drivers nodded to one another before returning to their cars, connected by a moment they would never forget, even though they never exchanged names. Among the most intriguing accounts were those of amateur astronomers, people accustomed to long nights at the eyepiece of a telescope. One such enthusiast, a retired teacher, had been setting up her equipment in her backyard when she noticed the lights. At first, she assumed it was a formation of planes, but as she tracked their steady motion, her certainty faltered. She described how the lights seemed to blot out the stars behind them, as though connected by a massive, unseen structure. Her notes, written in a neat hand later that night, spoke of a phenomenon that defied easy categorization. For her, the experience was not frightening but humbling, a reminder that even with years of watching the heavens, the sky could still surprise her. Even commercial pilots added their voices to the growing collection of testimonies. Some were cautious, aware that their professional reputations rested on precise observations. Yet a few spoke quietly to reporters, describing unusual formations they had seen while approaching or departing Phoenix that evening. Their accounts were careful, measured, but they added weight to the sense that something beyond routine had occurred. In the world of aviation, where every movement is tracked and every detail matters, such observations carried significance. What unites these stories is not only what was seen, but the manner in which it was described. Again and again, the tone is calm, reflective, deliberate. Witnesses did not speak of fear or panic. They spoke of silence, of stillness, of an experience that seemed to invite contemplation more than alarm. Each account, whether from a seasoned pilot, a police officer, or a child gazing out a bedroom window, carried the same undercurrent of awe. The lights had moved across the sky with quiet dignity, and the people beneath them had responded in kind. Taken together, these eyewitness stories form a mosaic of human experience. Each tile is small on its own: a family at a window, a driver on a highway shoulder, an officer stepping from his patrol car. But when assembled, they reveal the larger picture of that night, a city touched not by chaos, but by wonder. The lights were the catalyst, but the true story lies in the way people paused, watched, and remembered. It is in the hush of voices, the quiet gathering of neighbors, the unspoken acknowledgement that for one brief moment, the familiar sky had opened itself to mystery, and in these calm recollections, preserved across time, the Phoenix Lights remain alive. Not as a solved puzzle or a definitive answer, but as an enduring story, carried in the voices of those who were their voices, that continue to remind us of how the ordinary can, without warning, slip into the extraordinary. In the mid-1990s, before the ubiquity of smartphones and instant digital sharing, the tools of recording were simpler and more deliberate. Families kept camcorders tucked away in closets, brought out for birthdays, graduations, or vacations. VHS tapes, stacked on living room shelves, carried the gentle hum of daily life, moments preserved in slightly grainy color. It was within this technological landscape that the Phoenix Lights appeared, and it was through these lenses, shaky, handheld, imperfect, that the event was carried beyond memory into lasting record. On that March evening, as lights moved silently across the desert sky, many people reached instinctively for their camcorders. Parents called for children to fetch them, their voices calm but tinged with urgency. Tripods were rarely at hand, so the footage that remains is often unsteady, the camera swaying as the person behind it adjusted their stance or turned to comment to those nearby. Yet in these imperfections lies the authenticity of the moment. The recordings capture not only the lights themselves, but the human presence surrounding them, the quiet gasps, the murmured questions, the occasional exclamation of awe. One of the most circulated tapes came from a resident who stood in his backyard, camcorder balanced against his shoulder. His voice, audible over the steady hum of the tape, spoke softly to those around him. He described what he saw as he filmed: the formation of lights, their silent motion, the way they held steady in the darkness. His words, spoken without embellishment, lent the footage a grounded quality. Viewers who later watched the tape could hear not only what he described, but the tone of calm wonder in his voice, a tone that mirrored their own responses when they saw the lights for themselves. Another family captured the event. From their driveway, the camera held low at first, catching glimpses of children darting in and out of the frame. As the person filming adjusted upward, the glowing orbs came into view, arranged in a line across the night sky. The children's voices filled the recording, full of curiosity rather than fear. "Look at that one exclaimed. "It's not moving like a plane." Their parents, standing nearby, spoke more softly, their words almost lost in the background. The footage, replayed later, carried with it the texture of family life, ordinary voices encountering the extraordinary, their presence inseparable. From the lights above, what these recordings revealed most clearly was the stillness of the event. Unlike dramatic footage, often associated with the idea of UFOs, blurry streaks, sudden movements, indistinct shapes, the Phoenix Lights appeared as steady, glowing points of light, suspended in calm silence. In video after video, the same qualities emerged: the unwavering brightness, the slow procession, the absence of sound. The uniformity across so many tapes lent the phenomenon a quiet credibility. It was not merely a trick of memory or imagination. It was there, captured in real time, preserved on magnetic tape. As word of the sightings spread, local television stations began to collect these recordings. Newsrooms received calls from residents eager to share their tapes, and staffers drove out to pick them up or invited people to bring them to the studio. Soon, the footage appeared on evening broadcasts, sometimes shown with minimal commentary. Viewers saw the same glowing shapes they had glimpsed in the sky, now framed within the borders of their televisions. The grainy quality of VHS did not obscure the essential details. If anything, it added a sense of immediacy, a reminder that this was the work of ordinary people, not professionals with elaborate equipment. The tapes traveled further still. National networks picked up the story, incorporating the most striking clips into segments on the nightly news. Shows that dealt with mysteries and the unexplained devoted airtime to the phenomenon, often replaying the same few seconds of lights hovering against the night sky. Each repetition carried the image into more households, imprinting it into the collective imagination. For viewers far from Arizona, the tapes became their connection to the event, their own window into a mystery that had unfolded hundreds of miles away. In this way, the Phoenix Lights became one of the first UFO events shaped profoundly by home video technology. Earlier sightings had often relied solely on eyewitness testimony, with sketches or written descriptions attempting to capture what had been seen. But here was something different, a visual record, imperfect but undeniable, reproducible across countless screens. The technology of the time-bulky camcorders, magnetic tapes, analog broadcasts gave the event a texture that was both intimate and communal. It was no longer just a matter of what individuals remembered. It was something people could rewind, replay, and share. The process of sharing itself carried a ritualistic quality. Families invited neighbors over to watch the footage on their living room televisions. Camcorders were set on coffee tables, tapes carefully rewound to the moment when the lights appeared. People leaned forward in their chairs, squinting at the screen, pointing out details, debating interpretations. The act of viewing became communal, much like the act of watching the skies had been. The tapes were not only evidence, they were conversation pieces, catalysts for reflection and wonder. Of course, the recordings also became a focus of skepticism. Some argued that the grainy quality of VHS made interpretation difficult, that lights in the sky could appear deceptive when reduced to flickering pixels. Others insisted that the consistency across multiple tapes suggested something tangible, something beyond the limitations of equipment. In either case, the very existence of the tapes ensured that the event could not simply fade into rumor or hearsay. They anchored the Phoenix Lights in a form that resisted dismissal. As months turned into years, the footage of the Phoenix Lights took on a life of its own. Documentaries included the recordings, often replaying them in slow motion or enhancing the contrast to emphasize the formation. Ufologists cited them as key evidence, while skeptics analyzed them for signs of flares or atmospheric effects. Through all of this, the original character of the tapes remained intact, calm, steady, human. The voices in the background, Children's questions, the parents' murmurs, the quiet commentary of witnessers remained as much a part of the record as the lights themselves. Looking back, it is clear that the tapes were not merely incidental. They were central to the way the Phoenix Lights were remembered and discussed. Without them, the event might have joined the long list of fleeting sightings, powerful in memory but vulnerable to doubt. With them, the lights became a shared experience, replayable and reproducible, a story that could cross the boundaries of time and place. The technology of the 1990s gave the phenomenon a kind of permanence, ensuring that it would linger not only in memory but in visible, audible form. And so, the grainy glow of the Phoenix Lights lives on in these recordings, ordinary tapes, made by ordinary people on an extraordinary night. They are not polished, not cinematic, but they carry the truth of the moment, the calm astonishment of a community gazing upward, preserved in light and sound for all who wish to see and hear. Through them, the mystery continues, steady as the lights themselves, gliding silently across the sky of memory. In the days that followed the quiet night in Phoenix, the story of the strange lights began to ripple outward, first through Arizona, then across the country. At first, it was local chatter, neighbors talking in grocery store aisles, co-workers sharing impressions at the start of the day, families phoning relatives who lived in other towns. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the conversations stretched further, carried by the media and magnified by curiosity, until the Phoenix Lights became part of a broader national dialogue. The earliest mentions outside Arizona appeared in small wire service stories, brief notes that summarized the basics. Residents of Phoenix had reported unusual lights in the sky. Many had captured the event on home video, and no official explanation had been given. These short pieces, reprinted in newspapers across the country, were understated, often buried deep inside the pages rather than on front covers. But even in these muted accounts, the essential intrigue remained. Thousands of witnesses, hours of visibility, and images preserved on tape as television picked up the story. The phenomenon reached a wider audience. Local Arizona stations replayed the home videos, often accompanied by calm narration from anchors who avoided sensationalism but could not disguise their fascination. Clips began appearing on national networks as well. News segments on NBC, CBS, and CNN devoted a few minutes to the strange sighting, showing the line of hovering lights and quoting residents who described what they had seen. Viewers who had never been to Arizona now saw what Arizonans had seen: glowing orbs stretching across the desert sky. The mid-1990s was an era when late-night television played a central role in shaping cultural conversation. Programs that mixed humor, celebrity interviews, and current events occasionally turned their attention to unusual stories, and the Phoenix Lights proved irresistible. Late-night hosts mentioned the event in their opening monologues, weaving it into jokes that drew laughter while keeping the mystery alive. A few shows invited guests who had witnessed the lights, giving them space to share their stories in a national forum. The tone was often light, but behind the humor lay a genuine recognition. Something strange had occurred, and many people wanted to hear about it. Beyond comedy, the story found a natural home in the world of talk radio. The 1990s were the golden age of late-night call-in shows, where listeners tuned in during long drives or sleepless hours to hear discussions about everything from politics to the paranormal. Programs like Coast to Coast AM gave extended airtime to the Phoenix Lights, with witnesses calling in to describe their experiences. The calm voices of truck drivers, retirees, and ordinary citizens filled the airwaves, recounting how they had watched the lights move in silence above them. Listeners hundreds of miles away, never having seen the lights themselves, leaned in close to radios and let the stories wash over them. The contrast between skeptics and believers gave these discussions a rhythm. Skeptics argued that the lights were likely military flares or experimental aircraft, pointing to the nearby presence of bases and training ranges. They emphasized the reliability of conventional explanations and cautioned against leaping to conclusions. Believers, meanwhile, stressed the uniqueness of the formation, the sheer number of witnesses, and the duration of the event. They spoke of the possibility that the lights were evidence of something beyond human technology, something that hinted at larger mysteries. Between these poles of belief and doubt, the story continued to grow. Print media also deepened the national conversation. Magazines that covered science, culture, or the unexplained devoted articles to the phenomenon. Writers interviewed witnesses, reviewed the tapes, and weighed the competing explanations. Some framed the event as a cultural curiosity, an example of how communities process mystery. Others treated it as a serious subject, a case study in the limits of official transparency. For many readers, and who gets to decide their meaning? As spring turned to summer, the Phoenix Lights entered the realm of popular imagination. References appeared in comic strips, in casual banter on morning shows, and in letters to editors. The event became a point of comparison whenever unusual lights were reported elsewhere, a shorthand for large-scale sightings. Even those who had not followed the details closely began to recognize the phrase Phoenix Lights, attaching to it a sense of mystery, of something that had touched thousands of lives at once. The timing of the event also shaped its resonance. The 1990s were years of renewed cultural interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Television series like The X-Files had captured the imagination of viewers, weaving stories of government secrecy and hidden visitors into weekly episodes. Films like Independence Day brought visions of alien ships into summer blockbusters. Against this backdrop, the Phoenix Lights felt both familiar and fresher, real-world event, echoing the themes of fiction, grounding them in lived experience. Yet, the national conversation did not resolve itself neatly. Theories multiplied, discussions stretched on, and the lights remained both explained and unexplained, depending on whom one asked. For skeptics, the eventual military explanation flares released during training exercise seemed sufficient. For others, the explanation felt incomplete, a dismissal that did not account for the breadth of the sightings or the consistency of the descriptions. This tension, gentle but persistent, kept the story alive. As years passed, the Phoenix Lights were revisited in anniversary pieces and documentaries. Each retelling reminded audiences not only of the event itself, but of the way it had entered public consciousness. It was more than a local mystery. It was a shared moment in American culture, a reminder of how quickly an event could spread from neighborhood porches to living rooms across the nation. The conversations that began in Arizona, spoken softly in backyards as lights drifted overhead, had become conversations shared by millions. They flowed through the channels of television, radio, newspapers, and magazines, echoing into households far from the desert. They connected people who had never seen the lights with those who had, weaving a national tapestry of curiosity and wonder. And so, the Phoenix Lights became not just a local story but a cultural phenomenon. They reminded people of the vastness of the night sky, the possibility of mystery, and the ways in which shared experiences captured on tape, carried by voices, replayed on screens can unite a nation in quiet contemplation. The Phoenix Lights, observed by thousands on that quiet March evening, naturally inspired a variety of theories. From military exercises to alternative interpretations, each explanation sought to reconcile what had been seen in the desert sky with the familiar patterns of the world. For those who observed the lights, and for those who later studied the event, the possibilities offered not only explanations, but a window into the human need to understand and categorize the unknown. One of the earliest and most frequently cited explanations came from the military. Officials stated that many of the lights were illumination flares dropped during a training exercise over the Barry Goldwater Range southwest of Phoenix. These flares, suspended by parachutes, would glow brightly in the darkness before slowly descending and eventually extinguishing from the ground. Their steady brightness and apparent alignment could give the impression of a coordinated formation, particularly when viewed from a distance. This explanation was straightforward, rooted in known technology and training practices, and offered a practical lens through which to interpret the otherwise mysterious sight. Yet for many witnesses, the flare explanation seemed incomplete. Observers reported a steady, V-shaped formation, moving slowly and silently across the night sky in a way that did not match the behavior of descending flares. Some lights were seen from the northern edge of the state before any training exercises had begun, and others appeared to maintain a consistent position relative to one another, defying the natural drift expected from parachuted flares. These discrepancies led some to suggest that while flares could account for a portion of the sightings, they might not explain the entire phenomenon. In this way, even the most plausible official theory left room for doubt. Another hypothesis focused on the possibility of experimental or stealth aircraft. Arizona's desert skies are frequently used for military aviation training, and the region's remote airspace allows for testing of aircraft that are not yet publicly known. Stealth technology, designed to minimize radar visibility, could potentially appear unusual to those observing from the ground. In some analyses, the V-shaped formation of the lights was compared to the expected arrangement of certain military craft during coordinated maneuvers. Yet while this theory accounted for some aspects of the light's appearance, it struggled to fully match witness descriptions. The immense scale reported by many observers suggested a size far beyond conventional aircraft, and the silent movement remained difficult to reconcile with the known capabilities of the time. Beyond official and military explanations, a range of alternative theories emerged. Some proposed that the lights were the result of atmospheric phenomena, reflections, distortions, or mirages caused by desert conditions, temperature gradients, or the alignment of celestial objects. In calm, desert nights, when the air is dry and the sky clear, distant lights can refract or shimmer in ways that appear unusual. This naturalistic perspective offered an elegant solution for some, emphasizing that extraordinary appearances can sometimes arise from ordinary physical conditions. Yet even proponents of this view acknowledged that it did not fully account for the specific movement patterns and the large number of independent witnesses who reported similar observations. UFO researchers and enthusiasts also proposed extraterrestrial explanations. In these accounts, the lights were described as craft of unknown origin, moving deliberately and silently across the sky. Advocates of this theory noted the consistency of witness reports, the duration of visibility, and the apparent coordination of multiple lights as suggestive of intelligence beyond human design. Importantly, these interpretations were presented in calm terms, emphasizing observation and reasoned analysis rather than panic or sensational claims. The intent was to explore possibilities, not to assert certainty, allowing listeners to consider a wider range of explanations. Some theories combined elements of different approaches. For instance, a hybrid idea suggested that flares or aircraft might account for part of the visual experience, but that psychological factors, expectations, attention, and the human tendency to recognize patterns enhanced the perception of coordination or scale. This view recognized that human perception is active, interpretive, and shaped by context. Witnesses were not imagining the lights themselves, but the way their brains processed multiple points of light in the vastness of the desert sky could amplify certain effects. Even with this interpretation, however, the core mystery remained. Lights appeared in the sky in ways that no single explanation could fully and conclusively capture. In analyzing these theories, it is striking how carefully each must be weighed. The lights were not fleeting flashes. They were sustained, observed by thousands, documented on tape, and described in detail across multiple locations. Any explanation, therefore, must account for scale, movement, duration, and the diversity of perspectives. Simple answers rarely satisfied, and the multiplicity of interpretations reflects the complexity of the event. It is a reminder that even in a world dominated by science and technology, some occurrences resist simple categorization. Importantly, the variety of explanations has not led to conflict, but to reflection. Skeptics and believers alike often describe the event in similar tones, with curiosity, calm attention, and careful observation. Conversations about the Phoenix Lights rarely escalate into panic or argument. They are shared instead as exercises in wonder, a collective meditation on what it means to witness something unusual. By presenting multiple possibilities, can coexist. Over time, the Phoenix Lights became a touchstone for discussions about observation, evidence, and uncertainty. Military flares, experimental aircraft, natural atmospheric phenomena, and the possibility of unknown craft all inhabit the conversation simultaneously. No single explanation dominates completely, and each has merit in specific contexts. Yet, the enduring impact of the event lies not in resolving the mystery, but in the calm attention it inspired. The way it prompted observers to look upward and share their experiences without fear or haste in this balanced landscape of theories. The lights retain their quiet mystery. whether understood as technology, nature, or something beyond human comprehension. They illustrate the way ordinary life can intersect with extraordinary phenomena. Each perspective adds a layer, and together they create a rich, contemplative view of an event that continues to engage curiosity. Theories provide context, but they do not diminish the experience itself. A night when the desert sky held steady, glowing orbs passed silently overhead, and thousands of people paused to watch, listen, and reflect. And so, the Phoenix Lights remain open to interpretation, inviting calm exploration rather than urgent conclusion. Each theory is a lens through which to understand a fragment of what occurred, and in the interplay of these perspectives, the story maintains its depth and resonance. The lights themselves are steady, silent, and persistent in memory, offering a gentle, enduring mystery that encourages observation, thought, and wonder without ever needing to be fully solved. In the wake of the Phoenix Lights, a quiet but persistent community of researchers began to take note. These were not casual observers, nor were they driven by sensationalism. They were ufologists, scientists, writers, and dedicated enthusiasts, each drawn by curiosity and the desire to understand. Their work was methodical, careful, and reflective, shaped by the same calm attention that characterized many eyewitness accounts. One of the earliest groups to organize a formal investigation consisted of ufologists who traveled to Phoenix to speak with residents. They conducted interviews, recorded detailed notes, and collected as many home videos and photographs as they could find. Each account was treated with respect, and witnesses were encouraged to describe what they had seen in their own words, without interruption or judgment. Researchers emphasized consistency, noting the remarkable similarity of reports from widely separated locations. These interviews formed a cornerstone of later analyses, providing a rich archive of human experience alongside the physical recordings of lights in the sky. Writers and journalists soon became part of the conversation, documenting both the event and the community's responses. Some focused on the human element, families gathered in driveways, police officers pausing in the streets, neighbors sharing quiet moments of reflection. Others approached the event analytically, examining maps, flight paths, and military schedules to cross-reference possible explanations. In all cases, the emphasis was on observation, patience, and verification. The goal was not to prove the existence of extraterrestrials, nor to dismiss the event entirely, but to understand it from multiple perspectives, calmly and without haste. Scientific observers also contributed in measured ways. Some researchers examined atmospheric conditions, considering the clarity of the desert air, the absence of cloud cover, and temperature inversions that could alter perception. Others studied light behavior, noting how distant sources can appear larger or more uniform in the night sky. These analyses were not intended to debunk the phenomenon, but to provide context and enrich the discussion. By combining observational data with eyewitness testimony, scientists and enthusiasts alike were able to build a more complete picture, one that respected both evidence and experience. The calm, deliberate approach of researchers had a stabilizing effect on public discourse. Rather than inflaming fear or fueling wild speculation, their investigations invited reflection. Public presentations were often subdued, designed to inform rather than excite. Conferences and talks included detailed slideshows of maps, diagrams of light formations, and side-by-side comparisons of video footage. The language used was precise, measured, and respectful, mirroring the approach of the witnesses themselves. Through this methodical work, the Phoenix Lights were framed not as a fleeting anecdote, but as a significant, enduring event worthy of study. Ufologists also emphasized patterns and context. They compared the Phoenix Lights to other large-scale sightings, looking for similarities in formation, duration, and scale. While each event remained unique, these comparisons allowed researchers to develop hypotheses about behavior and movement. Importantly, than immediate judgment. Another aspect of the research involved public engagement. Scholars and ufologists often encouraged residents to submit additional materials, photographs, or accounts that might have been overlooked. Letters, audio recordings, and even casual sketches were collected, cataloged, and stored for future study. This participatory approach created a sense of shared inquiry, in which witnesses and researchers collaborated gently, with curiosity guiding the process. The act of contributing to the investigation became, for many, a way to process their own experience and preserve it for posterity. Writers also explored the cultural significance of the event. Some described how the Phoenix Lights had entered collective memory, becoming a point of reference in discussions of unexplained phenomena. Others analyzed media coverage, noting how calm reporting and the proliferation of home videos shaped public understanding. These essays and articles, written in careful, reflective prose, positioned the Phoenix Lights within a larger tapestry of human observation and storytelling. They underscored that the phenomenon was not merely a curiosity, but a lens through which to examine how communities respond to unexplained events. The calm attention of researchers extended to the skeptics as well. Rather than dismissing critical perspectives, ufologists and writers often documented them carefully, noting alternative explanations and inconsistencies. By presenting a balanced view, these researchers maintained credibility and reinforced the central idea: the Phoenix Lights could be studied rigorously without sensationalism. This approach fostered an atmosphere of thoughtful curiosity, encouraging listeners and readers to consider evidence thoughtfully, weigh competing theories, and remain open to possibility. Through their work, these calm observers ensured that the Phoenix Lights would endure not only as a memory but as a subject of inquiry. Their dedication preserved the voices of witnesses, the integrity of recordings, and the subtle details that might have been lost over time. By collecting, analyzing, and contextualizing the evidence, they offered future generations a resource to understand the event in all its quiet complexity. In the end, the continued interest of ufologists, scientists, and writers speaks to the event's enduring resonance. It was not the flash of a headline or the excitement of a sensational story that gave the Phoenix Lights staying power. It was the measured curiosity of those who sought to observe carefully, document fully, and consider deeply. Through their efforts, the Lights were transformed from a fleeting night in March into a lasting subject of reflection, study, and wonder. And so, the story of the Phoenix Lights persists, carried gently in the work of those who have approached it not with fear nor with haste, but with calm attention. Their voices remind us that curiosity, patience, and careful observation are as essential to understanding mystery as any technology or theory. In the quiet of the desert night, under the glow of lights that moved silently across the sky, the human desire to observe, record, and reflect became part of the event itself, calm, enduring thread woven through the tapestry of memory and study. Over the years, the Phoenix Lights moved beyond their origin as a local Arizona event to become a quiet but persistent part of American culture. They are referenced not only in discussions of UFOs, but also in art, literature, film, and music, a testament to the way a single night in March 1997 resonated far beyond the desert sky. The story's influence is subtle, not flashy, entering public consciousness through gentle repetition rather than spectacle. In print media, the Phoenix Lights appeared in books and magazines that explored unexplained phenomena. Some writers devoted entire chapters to recounting the events, detailing eyewitness accounts, and examining home video footage. Others used the lights as a case study in discussions of perception, memory, and collective experience. These accounts often treated the event with quiet respect, focusing on the human element, the families on porches, the police officers pausing in streets, the neighbors sharing hushed conversations under a desert sky. By emphasizing lived experience over sensationalism, the phenomenon was framed as a lens through which to understand both mystery and community. The Phoenix Lights also found their way into television and film. Documentaries revisited the events on anniversaries, featuring interviews with witnesses, researchers, and officials. Independent filmmakers incorporated references into fictional narratives, sometimes as visual motifs, sometimes as plot elements. Television programs occasionally used the event as a point of comparison when reporting new sightings, further embedding the story in popular culture. In each instance, the emphasis was calm and reflective. The lights were not treated as a source of fear, but as a catalyst for curiosity and contemplation. Even popular music occasionally nodded to the phenomenon, capturing the sense of wonder and the expansive desert night. Lyrics, imagery, or even album art invoked hovering lights or mysterious skies, resonating with listeners familiar with the story. The Phoenix Lights thus extended into subtle cultural memory, influencing artistic expression in a way that was gentle yet enduring. The reference was often understated, recognizable to those in the know, inviting quiet reflection rather than overt spectacle. The story's influence also shaped the UFO community. Researchers, writers, and enthusiasts often cite the Phoenix Lights as a foundational event, a benchmark for large-scale sightings. Its scale, thousands of witnesses, videos, and official statements provided a model for evaluating other events. The calm documentation, collected interviews, and preserved tapes offered a template for future investigations. New sightings were frequently compared to the Phoenix Lights, providing context and a reference point for both analysts and casual observers. In this way, the event became a touchstone within a broader culture of study and curiosity. Socially, the Phoenix Lights fostered a sense of shared memory. Annual gatherings and commemorative events in Phoenix allow residents and visitors to reflect on the night, hear updated analyses, and reconnect with the story in person. These events emphasize community, observation, and reflection, reinforcing the calm, contemplative spirit that characterized the original experience. Participants often describe a quiet sense of wonder, recalling the stillness of the desert sky and the shared human experience of looking upward together. The lights also entered the realm of civic memory. In Phoenix, local institutions sometimes reference the event in cultural materials, exhibitions, or museum displays. While the treatment is never sensational, it acknowledges that the night of March 13, 1997, became a defining moment for the city. Residents recount their own experiences in calm tones, emphasizing the unusual alignment of circumstances, clear skies, attentive witnesses, and the rare presence of lights that captured the imagination of so many. The city itself, through these narratives, becomes a living archive of human curiosity. Internationally, the Phoenix Lights have drawn attention as a case study in widespread observation. Researchers in other countries reference the event when examining large-scale sightings, noting the importance of multiple, independent witnesses and recorded evidence. The calm approach taken by Arizona residents, researchers, and media outlets has influenced how similar events are discussed worldwide, emphasizing careful observation over fear, documentation over sensationalism. Perhaps most importantly, the Phoenix Lights remain a source of quiet wonder. They encourage reflection on the vastness of the night sky, the limits of perception, and the possibilities that lie beyond ordinary experience. The lights remind us that ordinary people, families, officers, drivers, pilots can encounter moments of extraordinary beauty and mystery without panic or chaos. Their enduring presence in culture underscores the value of curiosity, patience, and calm observation. They invite contemplation, a gentle meditation on what it means to witness the unknown. The cultural legacy of the Phoenix Lights, therefore, is subtle, pervasive, and enduring. It is felt in conversations among friends, in the pages of books, in films and documentaries, in artistic expression, and in the ongoing study of unexplained phenomena. The event is not just a historical occurrence, but a touchstone, a quiet reminder of how humanity responds to wonder. By entering the public imagination in a calm and reflective manner, the Phoenix Lights continue to inspire curiosity and dialogue, shaping the way people think about observation, evidence, and the mysteries of the night sky. In this sense, the lights are both phenomenon and symbol. They reflect the ability of ordinary events to become part of collective memory and popular culture. They illustrate how calm attention, careful documentation, and thoughtful reflection can transform fleeting moments into enduring narratives. And they remind us that mystery need not be sensational to be profound. It can be gentle, patient, and quietly transformative, much like the lights themselves, hovering silently above the desert, touching lives and remaining in memory long after the moment has passed. As the night deepens and the desert sky stretches endlessly above, it is worth pausing to reflect on what the Phoenix Lights have come to represent. They are more than a series of glowing orbs drifting silently overhead. They are a reminder of the quiet wonder that can arise when the ordinary world intersects with the extraordinary. For those who witnessed the lights, the experience was never hurried or chaotic. It unfolded slowly, with calm observation and a sense of shared humanity. Parents guided their children to windows, neighbors lingered on porches, and strangers paused on streets, all connected by the soft glow above them. In thinking back on that night, one can imagine the subtle details that accompany such moments of awe. The stillness of the desert, the gentle rustle of wind through cacti, the way distant mountains seem to fade into the horizon under the moonlight. Even the faint sounds of the city, the hum of a passing car, the muted voice of a neighbor blend into a background that is at once familiar and serene. Against this quiet, the lights moved with gentle precision, inspiring contemplation rather than alarm. It is a memory of balance, where curiosity and calm coexist. The Phoenix Lights also remind us of the power of observation. In a world often filled with rush and distraction, the act of pausing to watch, to notice, to simply be present can be transformative. Witnesses did not rush to interpret or to judge. They allowed themselves to observe fully, letting the experience unfold naturally. In doing so, they engaged in a form of quiet mindfulness, attuned to the world around them and the fleeting moments that sometimes carry unexpected beauty. Imagination, too, finds a place in this reflection. The lights invite gentle speculation, the kind that stirs thought without demanding answers. What was moving across the sky that night? Could it be technology, natural phenomena, or something entirely beyond human understanding? The questions linger, not to provoke fear, but to encourage wonder. They remind us that the world contains mysteries that may never be fully solved, and that there is value in embracing the unknown with calm attention and openness. In the years since that March evening, the Phoenix Lights have become a quiet touchstone for many a story passed along in conversation, revisited in documentaries, remembered in home videos and family anecdotes. Yet the true essence of the event lies not in recordings or reports, but in the shared experience of looking upward together. It is a memory of connection, neighbors noticing the same sky, families gathered in stillness, a city collectively encountering the unknown. It speaks to the human capacity for wonder, curiosity, and reflection. As one imagines the lights moving silently, one can also imagine the gentle descent of night into deeper darkness. Stars emerge, scattered across the sky like tiny points of remembrance, each one a reminder that the universe is vast, and that our place within it is both intimate and small. The Phoenix Lights, in their calm passage, echo this truth. They encourage quiet contemplation, the kind that settles the mind and softens thought, allowing the listener to drift into reflection and rest. There is a subtle lesson in this evening of observation. Not every question needs immediate resolution. Not every mystery demands a definitive answer. Some experiences are meant to be lived, remembered, and quietly pondered. The Phoenix Lights exemplify this principle. They remain decades later, a gentle reminder that the universe contains moments that inspire curiosity, humility, and awe. By embracing the unknown without haste, one can find peace in uncertainty, comfort in observation, and joy in the simple act of noticing. And so, as the lights fade into memory, as the desert returns to its calm nocturnal rhythm, one is left with a lingering sense of serenity. The story concludes not with resolution, but with gentle acceptance of mystery. The Phoenix Lights hover in imagination as surely as they did in the sky, steady, silent, and serene. They invite the mind to wander softly, to reflect calmly on the night, on wonder, and on the quiet moments that shape human experience as sleep approaches. One might picture the desert once more, the vast expanse under a deep, dark sky, the stars twinkling like distant fires, and somewhere above, the lights moving gently across the horizon. It is a moment suspended in time, a peaceful encounter with the unknown, and a reminder that some mysteries are best appreciated not with urgency, but with quiet attention and gentle curiosity. In this calm, the mind can rest, the heart can settle, and the listener can drift naturally into sleep, carrying with them the memory of a night when the ordinary world met the extraordinary in the stillness of the desert sky.